Good morning and welcome to Cross Currents, our weekly forum for in-depth discussion on pivotal societal issues. Today we delve into a question of profound global significance. Should governments implement a carbon tax to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? This is not merely an academic debate, it's a pressing concern that stands at the nexus of environmental stewardship, economic policy, and social equity. The urgency to address climate change is undeniable, yet the pathways to achieving substantial emissions reductions are fraught with complexity and contention. Joining us to dissect this multifaceted issue are two distinguished guests, Professor Alistair Finch, an esteemed environmental economist from the Institute for Sustainable Futures, who will argue in favor of implementing a carbon tax, and Ms. Isabelle Roche, representing a prominent business consortium, who will present the arguments against such a measure, highlighting potential economic and social repercussions. Our debate will proceed with opening statements from each speaker, followed by rebuttals, a moderated discussion, and concluding remarks. We aim for a robust and enlightening exchange.
Thank you, Dr. Hayes. The imperative to act decisively on climate change has never been more acute. Incremental adjustments are patently insufficient to avert the escalating crisis. A carbon tax, at its core, is an elegant and economically sound market-based mechanism designed to confront this challenge directly. It operates on the polluter pays principle, a cornerstone of environmental economics. Essentially, it involves levying a fee on the carbon content of fossil fuels, or equivalently, on the greenhouse gas emissions generated. This makes activities that produce high emissions more expensive, thereby creating a powerful financial incentive for businesses and individuals alike to reduce their carbon footprint. The beauty of this instrument lies in its capacity to permeate every level of the economy, encouraging a systemic shift towards cleaner energy sources, greater energy efficiency, and innovation in low-carbon technologies. Critics often overlook the revenue-generating potential of a carbon tax. These funds are not destined to vanish into a fiscal black hole. Rather, they can be strategically recycled. Imagine this revenue being returned to citizens through, quote, carbon dividends or tax cuts, effectively rendering the policy revenue neutral for many households. Alternatively, these funds could be earmarked for substantial investments in green infrastructure, renewable energy research, and support for communities transitioning away from fossil fuel dependence. We are not treading entirely new ground here. Jurisdictions like British Columbia in Canada and several European nations have implemented carbon pricing mechanisms with demonstrable success, decoupling emissions from economic growth and stimulating green innovation without crippling their economies. Their experiences provide valuable lessons in design and implementation, demonstrating that a carbon tax can be both effective in reducing emissions and economically manageable, if not beneficial. The transition will undoubtedly present challenges, but the cost of inaction, as corroborated by overwhelming scientific evidence, far surpasses the economic adjustments required by a well-structured carbon tax. It is a pragmatic, necessary step towards a sustainable and prosperous future.
Thank you, Dr. Hayes. While I and the businesses I represent unequivocally acknowledge the critical need for robust climate action, we harbor profound reservations about the carbon tax as the primary lever for achieving these goals. Our concerns are not rooted in a denial of the problem, but in a pragmatic assessment of the potential adverse consequences of this specific policy instrument on our economy and society. A carbon tax, by its very design, increases the cost of energy and, consequently, the cost of doing business. This burden would be disproportionately felt by energy-intensive industries, which are often crucial contributors to our national GDP and employment. We anticipate significant challenges for small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, which typically operate on tighter margins and possess fewer resources to absorb such additional costs, or to invest rapidly in alternative technologies. The specter of job losses in traditional sectors is a very real one, and the promise of and doesn't align, in terms of timescale or skill sets, with the immediate displacement that could occur. Furthermore, imposing a unilateral carbon tax risks what economists term, carbon leakage. This occurs when businesses relocate their production to jurisdictions without comparable carbon pricing, leading to no net reduction in global emissions, but a definite loss of domestic industry and jobs. Perhaps one of our most significant concerns is the inherently regressive nature of a carbon tax. Lower-income households spend a larger percentage of their income on essential goods and services, including energy for heating and transport. Thus, a carbon tax, unless meticulously designed with compensatory measures that actually reach these vulnerable groups effectively, would hit them hardest, exacerbating existing social inequalities. The practicalities of delivering such compensation fairly and efficiently are, frankly, daunting. We believe that a more balanced and less economically disruptive strategy is required, one that emphasizes targeted investments in research and development, innovation, and the deployment of existing clean technologies, rather than imposing a broad-based tax with such far-reaching and potentially damaging ramifications.
Ms. Roche has articulated several common, yet I believe surmountable, concerns regarding the economic impact of a carbon tax. It's crucial to differentiate between a crudely implemented tax and a thoughtfully designed one. The assertion that carbon taxes invariably stifle economic growth overlooks their potential as a powerful catalyst for innovation. By making pollution more expensive, we create a market imperative for the development and adoption of green technologies. This isn't about economic contraction. It's about economic transformation, fostering new industries, creating high-quality jobs in the clean energy sector, and enhancing long-term competitiveness in a decarbonizing global economy. Regarding the regressive impacts, this is a legitimate design challenge, not an insurmountable barrier. The revenue generated, as I mentioned, provides the very means to address this. Carbon dividends, direct rebates to households, or targeted reductions in other regressive taxes, like payroll or sales taxes, can more than offset the increased energy costs for low and middle income families. Several models demonstrate this progressive outcome is achievable. The polluter pays principle is, at its heart, an equitable concept. Why should society at large subsidize polluting activities through degraded environmental quality and future climate damages? A carbon tax internalizes these external costs. As for carbon leakage, this is a recognized issue, particularly for trade-exposed, energy-intensive industries. However, mechanisms such as border carbon adjustments, BCAs, are being actively developed and discussed internationally. BCAs would impose a levy on imports from countries without comparable carbon pricing, leveling the playing field and encouraging other nations to adopt similar climate policies. While complex, they are not unfeasible and are gaining traction as a necessary component of robust climate strategy. To delay action based on these manageable challenges is to ignore the far greater economic disruptions that unmitigated climate change will unleash.
Professor Finch places considerable faith in the efficiency of government to perfectly recycle carbon tax revenues and implement complex mechanisms like border carbon adjustments without significant negative side effects. While the theory of revenue neutrality is appealing, the practical execution of such schemes is fraught with administrative hurdles and political pressures. Will these rebates truly reach the intended recipients in a timely and adequate manner? History suggests a degree of skepticism is warranted. The promise of a seamless transition to a green economy, with new jobs readily replacing old ones, often downplays the very real disruptions and skills gaps. The transition period could be lengthy and painful for many communities and industries. We question whether the scale of green job creation, particularly in the short to medium term, can realistically offset the potential contraction in established sectors that are fundamental to our current economic infrastructure. Regarding border carbon adjustments, these are not simple regulatory tweaks. They are exceptionally complex to design and implement fairly, risking retaliatory tariffs and escalating trade disputes, which would harm our exporters and the broader global economy. There's a significant danger that BCAs could be perceived, or indeed used, as protectionist measures, undermining the principles of free and fair trade that have underpinned global prosperity. Instead of relying so heavily on a punitive tax measure, we advocate for a more diversified policy portfolio. This includes substantially increased public and private investment in breakthrough R&D for next-generation clean energy and carbon capture technologies. Furthermore, strengthening energy efficiency standards for buildings, vehicles, and industrial processes can yield significant emissions reductions cost-effectively. Sector-specific regulations and negotiated agreements with industry can also drive targeted change without the blunt force of a universal tax. These approaches foster collaboration and innovation, rather than imposing costs that could disproportionately harm our economic competitiveness and burden ordinary citizens.
Thank you both for those robust rebuttals. Professor Finch, Ms. Roche has underscored the immediate economic shocks and the practical challenges of revenue recycling and border adjustments. Specifically, how can a transition to a carbon tax be phased in or managed to minimize disruption, particularly for those energy-intensive industries and their workforces that are heavily reliant on fossil fuels currently?
That's a crucial consideration, Dr. Hayes. A phased implementation is essential, starting with a modest tax rate that gradually increases over time. This provides predictability for businesses to adapt and invest. Furthermore, a portion of the revenue can be directly reinvested into supporting these specific industries in their transition, funding R&D for cleaner processes, or providing retraining programs for workers. It's about a managed transition, not an abrupt shock.
Ms. Roche, you've proposed alternatives such as increased R&D investment and efficiency standards. Given the scientific consensus on the urgency of deep emissions cuts within the next decade, are these measures truly scalable and rapid enough to achieve comparable results to what a carbon tax aims for in a similar timeframe?
Dr. Hayes, the scalability and speed of alternatives depend heavily on the level of commitment and investment. Aggressive energy efficiency standards, for instance, can yield rapid and substantial emissions reductions, as can accelerated deployment of existing renewable technologies, incentivized through smart subsidies rather than punitive taxes. While breakthrough R&D is a longer-term play, significant advancements can be fast-tracked with concerted effort. The key is a strategic, multi-pronged approach that doesn't place an undue burden on the economy in the way a broadly applied carbon tax might.
One final point for both of you. How do you see public acceptance playing a role in the successful implementation of either a carbon tax or the alternative strategies you've respectively proposed?
Public acceptance for a carbon tax hinges on clear communication about its purpose and, critically, the tangible benefits of revenue recycling. When people see it as fair and directly beneficial, support grows. Transparency is paramount.
For alternative strategies, public acceptance is often higher, as they are perceived as more enabling and less punitive. Highlighting the benefits of energy efficiency, innovation, and job creation in new sectors, without the immediate cost implications of a tax, generally garners broader support. In closing, let me reiterate that the business community is not an obstacle to climate action. Indeed, many companies are at the forefront of developing and deploying sustainable solutions. Our reservations about a carbon tax stem from a genuine concern for its potential to inflict significant economic harm and social inequity. We've discussed the risks to competitiveness, the threat of carbon leakage, and the disproportionate burden it could place on lower-income households and small businesses, the backbone of our economy. The practical challenges of implementing fair and effective revenue recycling schemes, or complex and potentially trade-distorting border carbon adjustments, cannot be understated. These are not minor details. They are fundamental to the viability and justice of such a policy. We believe that a more constructive and ultimately more successful path lies in fostering innovation, strategically investing in green technologies, and implementing intelligent, sector-specific regulations and efficiency standards. This is an approach that seeks to build up, not to tax down. Collaboration between government, industry, and research institutions is paramount. We must pursue policies that are ambitious in their environmental goals, but also economically sustainable and socially equitable. A carbon tax, in our view, carries too high a risk of achieving its environmental aims at an unacceptable economic and social cost. Let us instead choose a balanced, pragmatic, and forward-looking strategy that encourages green growth without jeopardizing our economic foundations or the well-being of our citizens.
Throughout this debate, I have endeavored to present the carbon tax not as a punitive measure, but as an essential, market-driven instrument for addressing the climate crisis with the urgency it demands. Its efficiency in sending a clear price signal across the entire economy is unparalleled by other, more piecemeal approaches. The core arguments in its favor remain compelling. It internalizes the external costs of pollution, adhering to the fundamental polluter pays principle. It incentivizes innovation and the widespread adoption of cleaner technologies. And, crucially, it can generate substantial revenue. This revenue, if managed wisely through mechanisms like carbon dividends or investments in green transitions, can mitigate regressive impacts and ensure a just transition. The challenges Ms. Roche highlighted are design considerations, not fatal flaws. We must weigh the perceived costs of implementing a carbon tax against the scientifically established and economically devastating costs of inaction on climate change. The latter, encompassing extreme weather events, resource scarcity, and widespread ecological disruption, far exceed any economic adjustments necessitated by a carbon price. To shy away from effective, albeit challenging, policies like a carbon tax is to abdicate our responsibility to future generations. The transition to a low-carbon economy is not just an environmental necessity, it is an economic opportunity. I urge policymakers to look beyond short-term anxieties and embrace the carbon tax as a vital, powerful, and economically sensible tool in our collective endeavor to forge a truly sustainable and prosperous future for all. The time for incrementalism is over. The time for decisive action is now.
Professor Alistair Finch, Ms. Isabel Roche, thank you both for an exceptionally insightful and vigorously argued debate this morning. You have clearly articulated the complex considerations surrounding the implementation of a carbon tax, from its potential as an economic driver for emissions reduction to the significant concerns about its economic and social impacts. It's evident that while the goal of significant emissions reduction is shared, the preferred pathways and the assessment of policy trade-offs diverge considerably. The points raised today underscore the intricate balance policymakers must strike between environmental imperatives, economic realities, and social equity. There are no easy answers. This discussion has undoubtedly enriched our understanding of the issue and highlights the critical importance of continued, informed dialogue as we navigate the path towards a sustainable future. Thank you to our audience for joining us on Crosscurrents. We hope you'll tune in again next week for another engaging discussion.